Welcome back, baseball fans, to the 1970-73 Carryover League Draft, token round of the draft. I just want to explain how this works before we start. Make this really brief, then we'll pause and I'll give you the results of the token round of the draft. Draft tokens, of course, have been acquired throughout the postseason process. You start with 5, you make transactions, you add and subtract, This tabs them all up. 160 for the league, pluses and minuses. Should add up to 0, you finish with 160. And so then, once you know all your tokens and the draft is over, you have a way of starting free agency with the token teams getting the most. In this particular case, St. Louis, Philadelphia, the Giants have 7 tokens. So they get the first crack. Then you have, by order, San Diego, Texas, Milwaukee, and then St. Louis again with their 6th. You see how they have 7 there, 6th. And then when we get into the 5s, you'll see St. Louis again. So that's how it works until every team's exhausted their tokens, assuming we get to teams with 3 tokens finally saying we're done here and passing. If not, these teams will have to wait. There are teams that need players that don't have any currency to get them. So they have to wait till the rest of the league gets their players. And by currency, I made a note of a team that needs a player in a specific year. And this code 7004 means the 4th pick chosen in the year of 1970, the 6th pick chosen in the year 1970, 5th pick in the year 1970. That's what it means. How many of these are there? It's about 22 of them. And it corresponds in the draft to 22 empty spots. So after the draft, our league has 618 of 640 guys. They're all here. But these are the teams that improve players, and they have these blank spots. And they have to fill these up. That's part of the free agency token round of the draft. In addition to that, the other teams can simply add and subtract teams at their will. At a certain point, if a team locks in, they just say pass, and that's it. They can't jump back in. So that's the parameters of the token round of the draft, and we'll begin this shortly. Thanks for checking it out. Welcome back, baseball fans, to the 1970-73 Summer League token round of the draft. Has been wrapped up. Every team has content that they cannot go any further in this, and they've got the 20 guys that they want to go into the season with. Cards are being restored in boxes and for the off season of next year, and pretty content that all the talent, at least in 70 and to a certain extent 71, is in this league that is there. There's no great players being left out. It's one of the considerations. Anyway, with the first pick in the token round, it's the St. Louis Cardinals, who had 7 tokens. And St. Louis did a sign and trade. They signed Ron Brand and traded him to the Expos for Adolfo Phillips. They really wanted a corner outfielder. Phillips has the range Cardinals wanted. Brand is sort of can play all over the place, and he was an Expo, so the Expos are happy with that as well. All right, then Philadelphia, with their pick, they went on the clock needing a couple players and a 6th token. They punched that in. They needed 2 outfielders, and they got one who was a Philly, Ron Stone. Also a 1970 card for Stone, a 262 hitter. He will play outfield and until the help arrives. Right now they have Johnny Callison and Greg Luzinski, and Ron Stone's not a ton. So that gives encouragement to the Mets and Braves that really the Phillies really aren't quite there. As good as the draft they've had, they still have holes. All right, and then we have the Giants. The Giants also had 7 tokens. They acquired the 2 tokens in the Willie Mays deal. Didn't expend any to this point. They had an open roster spot, so they signed Chico Ruiz as a utility infielder, basically because he could play short in case Chris Spire gets hurt. Here's Chico Ruiz. Modest numbers. All these numbers are going to be kind of modest. 243 hitter. but versatile player, switch hitter, and again he backs up Spire for the Giants. Then you have passing. The Padres pass. They like their with 6 tokens. The teams with 7 tokens are all done. Now we go down to the teams with 6 tokens. The first of which is the Padres. They pass. They're happy with what they got. It's kind of interesting that after watching the 3 guys taken off the street and realizing the quality of play, which you're getting, and the fact that the Padres decide to keep what they have, it portends to that you might as well stick with what you got or be glad what you find. The teams who have the holes need to plug the holes. Everybody else is not going to take the luxury of improving guys generally. San Diego decided not to do it. Followed up by the Texas Rangers with 6 tokens who also passed. Next up with 6 is Milwaukee, who had a hole to fill, and that was at utility shortstop. And they found Dick Schofield sitting out there at age 35. He only hits 187, but he does have on-base percentage versus righties, and as a switch hitter, he'd be used there more. He is injury protection for Jim Fregosi. So then the Cardinals, now with 6 tokens, would pass. The one guy they took with the 7th token is all they would need to do. Again, showing that there's not a lot going on. To create that roster spot for Adolfo Phillips, the Cardinals ended up cutting one of their players, Dave Duncan. So he was a luxury pick. They had their 20, so they cut Dave Duncan to add Adolfo Phillips through Ron Brand. And also the Giants, the same thing. They cut Jim Ray Hart to get Chico Ruiz because Hart couldn't play shortstop. So those 2 guys became available, 1970 Dave Duncan and 1970 Jim Ray Hart. All right, the Phillies, again, up with their 6th token, needing a hole in the outfield, and they could only find Wayne Comer at age 26, hitting .212. He has a 2 defense in left field. He also has on base. Comer and Stone could platoon. Luzinski's out there, and Callison will play every day. That's one of your weaker outfields in all of the summer league. Now we have the rest of the teams who ended up getting 6 tokens, starting with Portland passing, Baltimore passing, California passing, the Giants passing. So that means we're down to 5 tokens, the number of tokens that you start the off season with. Of course, you add and subtract through that, but the average number of tokens would be 5. So we start at the very beginning of the draft then with Cleveland, who added and subtracted and ended up flatlining at 5 tokens. They pass, the Colorado Rockies pass, the Cubs pass, and then after that, then you get back to the Padres, who had passed earlier. They can't come back into this token round, so they pass. The Rangers passed earlier. Okay, now we have on the clock Atlanta, who has kept the rights to Maury Wills this whole time. They didn't punch any of his years in yet until they were absolutely positively sure which year Maury Wills they wanted between 1970 and 71. It was going to be 1970, then 71, then they were still undecided until in the 8th round when they made their second baseman Felix Millan go back to his 70 card. So with that, Atlanta punches the 71 Maury Wills card, basically a 2-year contract now instead of a 1-year contract. His defense is slightly better in 71. He's 38 years old. A 38-year-old shortstop is a 319. He's still a B stealer. So that's fine. 2 years of Maury Wills in Atlanta. All right, next up, Milwaukee passes after getting Schofield earlier, so they're done. Ohio, having to fill a roster spot, they found that, oh, we need a third baseman. Oh, the Giants just cut Jim Ray Hart? Oh, well, go as Jim Ray Hart. So Ohio actually does a pretty cool deal here. They get a 282 hitting third baseman. His numbers are excellent. 282, 360 on base, 431 slugging, 791 OPS. Jim Ray Hart. Wow. So, again, the Giants, it was unnecessary because they had Tito Fuentes and Ron Hunt, Chico Ruiz, and Chris Spire, so they just didn't need Jim Hart anymore. So that's Ohio's gain. Next up, the Expos, who pass with 5 tokens. Then the Cardinals, who we know pass. And then next up, it is Florida. Florida has to punch their 5th token. They need to add a catcher. And they add St. Louis's catcher, Dave Duncan. So 2 guys who are cut in the beginning of the token round of the draft, Dave Duncan and Jim Hart, lit up the waiver board and end up on Ohio and Florida. And if you notice, of course, you have traditional baseball teams, the Cardinals and Giants, cutting guys, and expansion teams, Ohio and Florida, collecting those guys. And that's kind of the way it should be. These expansion teams have to slowly find talent by teams who have too much talent in certain areas and can't keep everybody. All right, Philadelphia with their 5th token now. They've added the proper quantity of players and they decide to stop. And they're realizing that after Stone and Comer, they've looked a lot at free agents on the street and they're pretty sure there's nobody else available to make them better. So they stop. All right, the Yankees with their 5th token. They needed a roster spot. They needed a guy to play second base against lefties with power. And that's what Ron Slocum can do. He's a 141 hitter, but we saw this guy, if you watch the Winter Baseball Classic, we examined this guy's card pretty closely and thought that this is a pretty opportunistic card against left-handed pitching at least. Powers walks, and he can also catch and play second base. I mean, a lot of versatility. And so the Yankees sees that. He brings power to second base with Horace Clarke, who doesn't have any. All right, so Portland passed earlier, so they would pass again. Minnesota is finally on the clock with their 5th token. They needed to add a player, and the player they added was Rick Rennick to play third base against lefties. He's got a lot of power, ability to play third base, platoons with Ed Crosby, who has defense. What this also does is makes Harmon Killebrew a full-time DH. Even though he can qualify for first and third base, but he's not the best fielder. So they don't even need Harmon's versatility. He can concentrate on being the full-time DH with the Twins, does not have to play defense. All right, Kansas City is on the clock. They needed to add a right-handed reliever. And lo and behold, they went to the waiver wire and found the guy that they put on waivers in the offseason, Wally Bunker. No one was interested in him. He was still here in the token round. So Kansas City re-signed their guy. He had a 4.22 ERA, but it was definitely a come down from a very good 1969. All right, Baltimore passes, of course, and California passes. And then Cincinnati, with their 1st pick, they needed to add a player, and they add a Cincinnati Red player, Jimmy Stewart. And he was a Red, so it's good to see teams adding guys who match up who they play for in MLB. And he would be a left-handed option at second base to platoon with Tommy Helms if you want to. He also is, of course, your utility player, can play the infield and outfield. So that's a nice player, Jimmy Stewart for the Cincinnati Reds. All right, the Giants pass, of course. And then we get near the end of the fives, and it's Boston. Needing to add a player from the year of 1971, they needed to add a lefty bat just for variety. They only had 3 left-handed hitters on the entire team. One was Angel Bravo. The other 2 were Yastrzemski and Reggie Smith. So you would like to have a 4th lefty bat, and they added Larry Stahl, who is a lefty bat. It actually is a decent outfielder as well. 253, 310, 399 on slugging, 709 OPS isn't that bad. It's okay. You would be putting, he is technically a DH where you could have Angel Bravo or Tony Conigliaro or Jerry Moses. So they have 4 guys as candidates for a designated hitter in Boston. Not a big deal, but not very strong either. All right, so now we get down to the 4th token because we still have teams who are patiently waiting to make moves. So Cleveland, now you're going to see a slew of passing. Cleveland, Colorado, Toronto, the Cubs, Padres, Rangers, Braves, Milwaukee, Ohio, Arizona. Oh, Arizona would be the, this is the first time we've heard from them. And they were the team that finished their draft sooner than anybody. And turns out they passed in this round too. So they could have left the convention after a half day and nothing would have changed. They locked in their roster. The Expos passed with 4. St. Louis passed with 4. Florida, who picked earlier, they now pass with 4. And now finally we get teams who have yet to make a pick, and they need to do it. Beginning with the White Sox. The White Sox have a need in center field against left-handed pitching because Buddy Bradford's imbalanced. He tears up righties, not lefties. So they took Russ Snyder, who's a lefty who hits lefties better than righties. They got a reverse platoon going on with Snyder and Bradford. That's the best I could find, is Russ Snyder. Pittsburgh, their first time today. They need to add a left-handed bat at shortstop to work with Gene Alley, and they add Marv Staley to the equation. Russ Snyder, Marv Staley. And then Seattle, their first, and you're going to hear a lot from Seattle. They needed to add a lefty to the bullpen. In 1970, yikes. They added Skip Pitlock. 4.66 ERA and a whip of 1.6. So that's what you're going to find this late in the draft. All right, so Phillies pass. The Phillies and the Yankees passed. Portland, Minnesota now passes. And Las Vegas is finally on the clock with their first pick in the round of 4. And they take Jarvis Tatum. Tatum is a corner outfielder with Art Shamsky, platooning with Art Shamsky. He's a 3 in the outfield, that's fine. Kansas City passes. Houston's first mention of the day, they're looking for just simply a guy to bat against left-handed pitching, the 9th guy. And Greg Goosen would platoon with Tom McGraw at first base. Baltimore passes. Oakland with a 4th token. Needs that a couple guys. They had Von Joshua, actually a decent 266 and a 2 in the outfield. He can play some center field with Angel Mangual. All right, Dodgers on the clock, needing 2 guys in the year of 1971. And they finally decide to raid the piggy bank on their young talent. Unfortunately, they mismanaged the years terribly. And instead of waiting, Joe Ferguson was selected, and he's not very good. If you wait a couple years, he'll be excellent. But you bring him into the league with a 216 batting average and a 608 OPS. At least he has a -1 arm. So that's a head-shaking move. But again, it plants the seed. This season for the Dodgers looks very weird. I'm almost thinking that they're planting the seeds to win the World Series next year by everybody blooming at once. Because they added Sutton and Brewer at the beginning of this draft to be dominant, and that neglected a lot of other areas of the roster. So Joe Ferguson is on the team, though he's not very good. And when you see the next guy, you'll see the same thing. All right, the California Angels pass, the Reds pass, the Giants, the Red Sox, and lastly, the New York Mets. The first time we've talked about the Mets. With 4 tokens, they pass, just proving that they just went into the draft knowing what they needed to do, and they did it. Nothing special. No weaknesses on the Mets. So now you get down to the teams who still have 3 tokens and haven't quit yet. Beginning with the White Sox, they finally quit. Beginning with Pittsburgh, they finally quit. And then you have Seattle with their 3 tokens saying, we still need to add bodies. They need a corner outfield to platoon with Ron Woods, a left-handed hitter. The best they could find is Norm Miller out of Houston, 239, 689 OPS. That's what you get. We're really at the edge of this thing. Then Las Vegas, with their third 3 tokens left, said we still need to add a pitcher. And they did very good for themselves. They found a 1971. If you notice, most of these guys are the 1970 box, which is pretty much dead by this point. But in 71, there's a little more talent left, slightly more. And they found Jim York's best year at age 23. He has a 2.89 ERA in 1971. And it really is the only good year of his career. So good on an expansion team of securing that. That's what you want out of your Vegas, Seattle, Florida, Ohio players, etc. You want them to secure the flash in the pan guys when they're at their best. All right, Houston with only 3 tokens passes. They're out of this now. Oakland, we mentioned they needed 2 guys earlier. Their second guy is a DH against lefties, SWANSON. A corner guy who at 245 hits lefties better than righties. He can be he's a DH against lefties for Oakland. And then of course the Dodgers. Here we are again in the year 71 with only 3 tokens left. They needed a bat against left-handed pitching, and they took Steve Garvey. And the problem is it's 1971, and he can only play third base, and he's very bad. He's a 40-37, and he hits 227. But what they figured is, you know what? Let's just get him in the league now. Next year, we can bump him up to a 74 card, and suddenly he goes from being a struggling rookie to a World Series participant. So expect Garvey and Ferguson to immediately be improved next year in that draft. And when you think about this timeline, I might want to mention, it is the 1970-73 carryover league, and the Dodgers are not represented in the playoffs, but boom, they hit hard in 74. I'm starting to think that that's been kind of the strategy when we look at the availability and years of players present. So if that is the case, and the Reds aren't in the National League West because of realignment, it portends well for your Giants, who look loaded, and for the Astros and Padres to contend for a wild card spot. It could be the Dodgers tanking this year after the Dodgers got swept out of the playoffs by the Mets last year. They lost 4 straight to the Mets. So that leads me to think that they know they're not ready. So, all right, Detroit, down to, we haven't heard from them yet. They only had 3 tokens to start this process. The Detroit Tigers, and they ain't passed. So they sat around for 4 hours just to let everybody know we're not interested. So they're done business. Congratulations, Detroit. They're happy with the roster. All right, Seattle. Now we're down to teams with 2 tokens, folks. And Seattle, they're still adding guys. They add Don Wirt, who will be the final player added, as a third baseman who is a 2. So they added defensive third base because they had Maxville at short, and Joe Foy and Jerry Devannon. They actually can have 2s and 3s in second, third, and short. So that's good news for Seattle. And then after that, of course, once you're down to 2 tokens, the Vegas team, the Oakland team, and the Dodger team pass. And of course, Seattle had only the 1 token left. And if they kept adding players, we might have had to cut them off because you don't have any currency whatsoever to add guys. So Seattle, with their 1 token left, decides to pass. And once that happens, then the league year is considered done at this point, or the last year, and the off season is done, and the regular season is ready, and the currency gets reset before next off season. So let's take just a quick peek here. Again, we have the draft results are, of course, here, 256 picks. But the good news is all teams have their 20 players matching up, starting alphabetically with Arizona. And it was such a relief as far as from the technical side. When I did a sort the first time, it got to exactly 640, which is it's supposed to be. Normally I have a spelling mistake in here somewhere, or I hit a wrong letter. But it instantly reconciled at 640, so I must be getting better at this stuff. So the 640 for all players, 8 from 1970, 6 from 71, 4 from 72, and 2 from 73. Everybody's got somebody. The 2560 spreadsheet after going through a draft and cutting and deleting players who are duplicates, I'll scroll down. The 2560 is down to 2087. So you see almost 600 cards were erased during this draft. Plus you got these purple cards here that are nameless. So we're down to 1,864 eligible cards. And actually I can take a nice little peek at this middle area here for each of the future years. We have, turns out here are the 1970 players who did not make it. We saw some of these in the Winter Baseball Classic, and basically it means that we tried. We did everything we can in 4 years, but you still aren't good enough. Sometimes a guy is present on a list, and I don't put him on a team, or I prefer a different guy to go to a team if it means the possibility of changing some semblance of Major League history that I'm trying to match in certain areas. In this particular class, it isn't even that big a deal, though a couple guys here, Cesar Geronimo is on this list, but the Reds didn't want him, and I didn't want him to go to any team but besides the Reds, as far as he wasn't any good anyway. So and then same with pitchers, there just isn't really anybody any good that's going to move forward and do anything. We saw a lot of those in the Winter Baseball Classic. You then, of course, have cards here, 1970 cards, who they're 71, 72, or 73 cards in the carryover league, so that's why the record still exists. And then we had one player who played in the league last year, only one, Julio Navarro, played for the Pirates, and he was flat out cut, and nobody picked him up because really it was kind of an experiment with the card. He gives up a ton of homers to left-handed pitching, and we experimented with the card last year. He did okay, but nobody wanted to do that experiment again, so he was the only guy. Really, one player is it that was cut, which is pretty remarkable. And then 4 guys who, one on the retirement list, weren't claimed. And this is what's left of your waivers, these guys. Remember, we start with 64. We start with 64 of them. But you end up now with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 35. Basically, half the guys you put on waivers you didn't invite back to the league. That means that it's so flat you could find a guy on the street or push a guy to a different year. And then after that, the next year of 1971, this becomes the last chance for next year's draft, an early look at that. The 71 guys who are in the league in 70, 72, or 73 represented in this green color. And then we have, again, 71 guys put on retirement lists who weren't drafted. The same yellow names here are a subset of what you saw above. It's the same player, but in a different year. Notice that Aspromonte is the first name. He would be in. He had 2 different year cracks to get picked up and didn't get picked up. The purple indicates that these cards don't even exist. I just wrote them in because they had limited playing time in 1971. So they really weren't eligible for a draft anyway. And then we have the 72. The 72 card set, teams had 1 level of protection. You see here that there is in this column, you have Atlanta, Baltimore, Boston. All the teams in alphabetical order had a few guys that they had limited protection with, and they could negotiate a trade to another team if somebody wanted them. Now that's over. Now next year, these guys will all be available to go with anybody in the league, along with the other 1972 players who were cut from the 72 team. Again, the light green shade for 72 means that this card exists in 70, 71, or 73. The retired guys, of which there would be few, because they would probably not continue to have a career 2 years after they were put on the retire list, or they'd be bad, and they were Leonard and Rudolph. And then you see the waiver list is now down to about 7 guys. Guys put on waivers after 1969, still kicking around baseball in 72, but nobody found them interesting. So 3 years of participation in baseball, but still not worth getting in the league. Then, of course, the 73, when you see them in light green like this, means that they have a 70 or 71 or 72 card in the league. So this database can just move directly into next year. A lot of work is done making it easier to go year to year. That's why I'm stretching this out and kind of showing this. And in 73, Ken Rudolph was retired in 69, kept playing baseball and kept doing not particularly great, having good cards, nobody wanted him. You see Bruce Delcant and Tom Griffin again. So they had 70 through 70, they had 4 cards represented here, and none of them were picked up. Delcant does okay, I think, in 74 or 75. Tom Griffin will eventually do well for the Giants in the mid-70s. And then lastly, the 1973 class, it's going to be a big one. And you see here, they're still stored under the team that they were drafted into in the individual team draft. And they're going to stay that way. And this is a nice chunk of players. So we'll subtract 1693. We'll scroll all the way down. $171. So there's 171 guys who have protection on the team. So if you didn't draft a guy that you liked in your farm system, 173 guys, 32 teams, that's 5 per team, 5 to 6. An average of 5 to 6 players you did not draft this year from your minor league system, you still have the rights to the next year. So that's good news. You only take 2 in the first year, and you have 5 to 6 in this instance available. So that's good news. And that's 1864 total records involved. And of course the nameless records here. Not nameless, the nameless card records that I don't even use. That's the bottom of the database. There you have it, folks. That's it. Thanks for checking out the token round and the end of the draft. It is time for opening day. Baseball's around the corner. We will have opening days for all teams. Summer League 70, 73, kicking off end of March, early April of 2022. Thanks for checking this out. We'll see you next time.